The courtroom on Nexus Station buzzed with the cold efficiency of corporate justice. Holographic displays projected the charges in sterile blue light, while automated cameras captured every angle for the mandatory broadcast. Zara Voss stood in the defendant's cage, her hands shackled behind her back, watching her 8-year-old son Marcus through the reinforced transperistyle barrier that separated the gallery from the proceedings. His small face was pressed against the glass, eyes wide with confusion and terror. She had tried to prepare him for this moment during their brief visits in the detention center. But how do you explain to a child that the galaxy's most powerful corporation has decided his mother must die for a crime she didn't commit? The defendant will rise for sentencing. Judge Thorne's voice echoed through the chamber, enhanced by neural amplifiers that gave his words an otherworldly authority. The man had been bought and paid for by Meridian Dynamics long before Zara's case reached his bench. Zara was already standing, had been standing for the past 6 hours as witness after witness testified to her alleged crimes. Corporate espionage, they claimed, theft of proprietary terraforming data worth billions of credits. The evidence was manufactured with such precision that even she might have believed it. Had she not known the truth, the real crime had been simpler, more human. She had discovered that Meridian's new atmospheric processors were poisoning the water supply. On 3 colony worlds, thousands were dying slowly, their deaths attributed to common illnesses while the corporation continued to profit. When she tried to report it through proper channels, she learned that those channels led directly back to the very executives orchestrating the cover-up. Zara Voss, Judge Thorne continued, his synthetic voice devoid of emotion. You have been found guilty on all charges. The penalty for corporate espionage in the 1st degree is death by neural dissolution. The sentence will be carried out immediately. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of gasps and satisfied murmurs. Meridian shareholders in the gallery nodded approvingly while news drones buzzed overhead, capturing the moment for the evening feeds. Justice served, they would report, the rule of law upheld. But Marcus wasn't watching the judge or the crowd. His attention was fixed entirely on his mother, tears streaming down his face as he pressed both palms against the barrier. Zara found herself thinking not of her impending death, but of the bedtime stories she would never finish telling him, the scraped knees she would never bandage, the man he would become without her guidance. Security Chief Cullum approached her cage, his massive frame casting a shadow over the proceedings. He was a war veteran turned corporate enforcer, his cybernetic implants gleaming beneath the harsh courtroom lights. Time to go, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man whose job was to ensure compliance through fear. As they led her from the courtroom, Zara caught one last glimpse of Marcus. He had stopped crying, his young face hardening into an expression that looked far too old for his years. In that moment, she saw something that chilled her more than the prospect of her own death. She saw hatred taking root in her son's heart, and she knew that whatever Meridian Dynamics thought they were ending today, they were actually beginning something far more dangerous. The execution chamber was a sterile white room dominated by the neural dissolution chair. The device looked deceptively simple, padded restraints, a crown-like apparatus lined with quantum processors, monitors that would display her final brainwaves for the attending physician's confirmation of death. What it actually did was more horrifying than any medieval torture device. Neural dissolution didn't just kill the body. It unraveled consciousness itself, breaking down the electrical patterns that formed thoughts and memories into component frequencies, before dispersing them into random static. In theory, it was humane, instantaneous, and painless. In practice, it was the ultimate violation, erasing not just a life, but the very essence of what made that life unique. Any last words? Callum asked as the technicians prepared the equipment. It was a formality, but she could see in his eyes that he actually cared about her answer. Perhaps he had children of his own. Zara looked directly into the camera that would transmit her final moments across the galaxy. Marcus, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Remember that love is stronger than hate. Remember that truth always finds a way. And remember that I will always be proud of you, no matter what choices you make. She closed her eyes as they lowered the neural crown onto her head. The last thing she saw was the red execution light, beginning to pulse, synchronized with her heartbeat. The last thing she felt was the cold touch of quantum processors against her temples. The last thing she thought was a prayer that her son would prove her final words true, that love would triumph over the hatred she had seen growing in his eyes. The dissolution was instantaneous. One moment Zara Voss existed as a unique pattern of consciousness in the universe, and the next she was simply gone. The monitors flatlined. The attending physician confirmed the completion of the sentence, and the corporate newscasters began their prepared statements about justice and deterrence. But in the gallery, Marcus Voss stood frozen, his small hands pressed against the transperistal barrier that separated him from his mother's body. He had memorized every word of her final message, and in his young mind, he was already beginning to understand which of her directives he would follow and which he would ignore. The love part would come later, he decided, much later. First, there would be other lessons to learn. Lessons about power and leverage, about patience and planning, about finding the weak points in systems that seemed invulnerable. Meridian Dynamics thought they had eliminated a problem today. They had no idea they had just created their greatest threat. As the crowd dispersed and the execution chamber was prepared for cleaning, Marcus remained at the barrier until security finally came to escort him away. He would be processed through the corporate orphanage system. They told him, given a new identity, a fresh start, a chance to contribute positively to society. He nodded and followed them obediently, already beginning to plan. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were others like his mother, people who had discovered uncomfortable truths about Meridian's operations, people who might be willing to help a parentless child if that child could prove useful enough, people who understood that sometimes the only way to honor love was to first satisfy the demands of justice. The legend of Marcus Voss began that day, though it would be years before anyone realized it. In the corporate records, he was simply another orphaned ward of the state, destined for re-education and eventual employment in the vast machinery of galactic commerce. In reality, he was something far more dangerous, a child with nothing left to lose and everything to learn about revenge. 10 years had transformed Marcus Voss from a grieving child into something far more dangerous. At 18, he moved through the neon-soaked undercity of Titan's Edge like a shadow with purpose. His mother's execution, having taught him that survival required becoming invisible to those in power while remaining indispensable to those who operated in the spaces between laws. The corporate orphanage had tried to break him, to mold him into another compliant cog in Meridian Dynamics' vast machine. They had failed spectacularly. Marcus had learned their lessons well enough to pass their evaluations, but he had also learned other things during his stolen hours in the facility's data cores. Things about shell companies and hidden assets, about the real names behind the corporate pseudonyms, about the carefully buried trail that led back to his mother's frame-up. Now he sat in the back corner of the Vagrant's Rest, a smuggler's cantina, built into the hollowed-out hull of a decommissioned cargo hauler. The air was thick with recycled atmosphere and the smoke from a dozen different worlds' intoxicants. This was where information flowed like the cheap liquor, where a young man with the right skills and enough patience could learn the locations of things that weren't supposed to exist. "You're new," said a voice to his left, cutting through his concentration. He looked up from his data tablet to find a woman sliding into the booth opposite him. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair that caught the amber light from the cantina's atmospheric processors and eyes, the color of deep space, dark blue flecked with silver. Her clothing marked her as ship crew, but the confident way she carried herself suggested she was captain rather than subordinate. "New enough," Marcus replied, closing the tablet and giving her his full attention. There was something about her that made his carefully maintained emotional walls waver slightly. "Though I'm starting to think this place has been waiting for me," she smiled, and he felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with his mission of revenge. "Naya Blackwood," she said, extending a hand that was callous from honest work, but soft enough to suggest she took care of herself. "Captain of the Stardancer, and you are either very brave or very stupid to be sitting in Kellum's favorite booth." Marcus glanced around the cantina with new awareness. Security Chief Kellum, the same man who had escorted his mother to her execution was indeed irregular here. The knowledge that he was sitting where his mother's killer once relaxed should have filled him with rage. Instead, he found himself oddly calm, almost pleased by the coincidence. Maybe a little of both, he admitted, accepting her handshake and noting how her fingers lingered against his palm for just a moment longer than strictly necessary. Marcus Webb. The false name rolled off his tongue easily. He had been practicing it for years. Well, Marcus Webb, what brings you to the armpit of Titan's Edge? You don't look like the usual run of smugglers and data thieves who frequent this establishment. Naya signaled the bartender for the drinks, making the decision for both of them with the casual authority of someone accustomed to command. Marcus found himself studying her face, looking for signs of the corruption that seemed to taint everyone connected to the corporate underworld. Instead, he saw intelligence, humor, and something that looked remarkably like integrity. It was unsettling. For 10 years, he had trained himself to see enemies and assets. Naya Blackwood didn't fit neatly into either category. Information, he said finally, deciding that partial honesty might serve him better than a complete fabrication. I'm looking for someone who can help me access certain restricted data files, corporate archives, security footage, personnel records, the kind of information that officially doesn't exist, but somehow always finds its way to places like this. The drinks arrived, something amber and potent that burned pleasantly on the way down. Naya took a sip and leaned back, evaluating him with those unsettling eyes. That's dangerous talk, especially for someone who looks young enough to still be in corporate education. What makes you think I'm the kind of person who deals in stolen data? Because you're sitting in a smuggler's cantina. You knew which booth belonged to a Meridian security chief, and you're carrying a plasma cutter, disguised as a jewelry piece on your left wrist. Marcus gestured toward the elegant bracelet that most people would dismiss as mere ornamentation. Plus, you're talking to me instead of walking away, which suggests you're either curious about my offer or planning to rob me. Naya laughed, a sound that seemed to light up the dim cantina. Very observant, though I prefer to think of it as selective redistribution of assets rather than robbery. She leaned forward, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something that reminded him of starlight and distant worlds. What exactly are you looking for, Marcus Webb? And more importantly, what are you willing to pay for it? This was the moment Marcus had been preparing for since his mother's death. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a data chip, placing it on the table between them. Personnel files from Meridian Dynamics executive staff, circa 10 years ago, specifically. Anyone involved in the Zara Voss case. And I'm willing to pay more than you've ever seen for a single job. Naya's expression shifted subtly, the playful flirtation replaced by professional interest. Zara Voss, the woman they executed for corporate espionage. That's ancient history, and dangerous ancient history at that. Why would someone your age care about a dead terrorist? The word terrorist hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of reaction he had expected. Meridian's propaganda machine had been thorough in rewriting his mother's story. Because the official story doesn't add up, because someone profited from her death, and they're still out there, and because sometimes the truth is worth more than safety. For a long moment, Naya said nothing, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. Finally, she picked up the data chip and slipped it into a scanner built into her wrist device. Her eyebrows rose as she read the contents. This is a complete financial analysis of Meridian's terraforming division, she said quietly. Revenue streams, cost projections, executive compensation packages. Where did you get this? I've been very patient for 10 years, Marcus replied. Patient enough to learn how corporate data systems work. Patient enough to identify the right people to cultivate as sources. Patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Naya was quiet for several minutes, her finger tracing the rim of her glass as she considered his proposal. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more personal. You know, there are easier ways to get yourself killed than taking on Meridian Dynamics. Quicker ways too. I'm not planning to get killed, Marcus said, surprised by the concern in her voice. I'm planning to get justice, Justice and revenge aren't the same thing, Marcus. Trust me. I've tried both. Something in her tone suggested personal experience with loss and disappointment. What happens after you get your information? What happens when you learn the names of the people who destroyed your life? The question caught him off guard because he realized he hadn't really thought beyond the revelation of truth. For 10 years, his entire existence had been focused on this moment, on finding the evidence that would prove his mother's innocence and expose those responsible for her death. The aftermath had seemed somehow irrelevant compared to the journey itself. I don't know, he admitted, and the honesty in his voice surprised them both. I suppose I'll figure that out when I get there. Naya smiled again, but this time it was tinged with something that looked almost like affection. You know what, Marcus Webb, I like you. You're either completely insane or the most idealistic person I've ever met. And right now I can't decide which possibility scares me more. She stood up, draining the last of her drink and tossing a credit chip onto the table to cover their tab. The star dancer is docked in Bay 17. Meet me there tomorrow at 2000 hours. Bring whatever other information you've gathered, and we'll see if we can't find the truth you're looking for. As she turned to leave, Marcus felt a sudden impulse that had nothing to do with his mission of revenge. Naya, he called after her. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And you're right that this is dangerous. She paused at the edge of the booth, looking back at him with those impossible eyes. Maybe because someone your age shouldn't have to carry that much pain alone. Maybe because I lost someone too, once upon a time, and I know what it feels like to want answers. She hesitated, then added more quietly. Or maybe because I have a weakness for lost cousins and beautiful idealists. The comment about his appearance sent an unexpected warmth through Marcus's chest, but before he could respond, she was gone, weaving through the crowded cantina with the easy grace of someone who belonged in places like this. He sat alone for a long time afterward, nursing his drink and trying to understand what had just happened to his carefully planned mission. For 10 years, he had thought of nothing but revenge, had shaped his entire existence around the pursuit of justice for his mother's death. He had never considered that the path might lead him to someone like Naya Blackwood, someone who could make him remember that there were things in the universe worth preserving as well as things weren't. Naya Blackwood had made her living reading people, and Marcus Webb was the most dangerous kind of puzzle, a young man with old wounds and the intelligence to make them everyone else's problem. As she watched him approach the star dancer through her ship's external cameras, she found herself questioning every instinct that had led her to offer him help. The star dancer was her pride and her salvation, a modified courier vessel that could outrun most corporate patrol ships, while carrying enough firepower to discourage the ones it couldn't avoid. She had bought it with blood money, compensation, for a cargo run that had gone catastrophically wrong 3 years ago, leaving her the sole survivor of a crew she had loved like family. Captain called her maintenance tech, Jorik, from the engine bay. That new encryption package you wanted is installed, though I still say taking on Meridian Dynamics is a good way to end up floating in vacuum. Noted. Naya replied, not taking her eyes off Marcus as he presented his identification to her security scanner. Even through the grainy external feed, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a weapon waiting to be drawn. But sometimes the right cause is worth the risk. The truth was more complicated than she was willing to admit to her crew. Marcus Webb reminded her of someone, not in appearance, but in the quiet intensity that burned behind his eyes. Her brother Tobias had carried that same fire when he discovered their father's involvement in a mining operation that was slowly poisoning an entire colony world. Tobias had tried to expose the truth through proper channels, tried to work within the system to save lives. The system had crushed him for his efforts, just as it had crushed Marcus's mother. Permission to come aboard? Marcus's voice came through the calm system, formal and careful. He had spent the night researching her ship, her crew, her reputation in the smuggling community. She appreciated thoroughness, even when it was directed at her. Granted, Bay 7. She keyed the airlock sequence and made her way down to meet him, noting how her pulse quickened as she descended the corridor. It had been a long time since anyone had affected her this way, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Marcus stepped through the airlock carrying a single duffel bag and an expression of barely contained awe. The Star Dancer was beautiful in the way that functional things could be beautiful. Every line and surface designed for efficiency and speed, but with enough personal touches to make it clear that this was someone's home rather than just a machine. "Welcome aboard," Naya said, offering him her hand in the traditional spacer's greeting. His grip was firm without being aggressive, and she noticed calluses that suggested he had done more than just data work. During his years of preparation, "Coffee, you look like you didn't sleep much." That obvious, Marcus followed her toward the ship's common area, his eyes taking in every detail of the corridor they passed through. She could practically see him cataloging potential escape routes and defensive positions. "I spent most of the night going through the files you'll need to access the Meridian archives." They settled in the ship's small galley, a cozy space dominated by a viewport that offered a spectacular view of Titan's Edge's nebula-wrapped horizon. Naya poured coffee from a pot that had been brewing since before dawn, noting how Marcus's attention kept drifting to the view outside. "First time in space?" she asked, settling into the seat across from him with her own cup. "First time on a ship this nice," he admitted. "The corporate transports are all functionality and no soul. This feels like," he paused, searching for the right words, "like someone actually lives here. It's been my home for 3 years." Naya found herself sharing more than she had intended. "Before that, I lived on cargo haulers with my crew. We were a family, in the way that people become. Family when they trust each other with their lives every day." Something in her tone made Marcus look up from his coffee, his engineer's mind clearly picking up on the past tense. What happened to them? Meridian happened. The words came out harder than she had planned, carrying years of carefully controlled anger. "We were running medical supplies to a colony world that had been quarantined due to environmental contamination. Officially, the blockade was for everyone's safety. Unofficially, it was to prevent anyone from discovering that Meridian's atmospheric processors were the source of the contamination." Marcus set down his cup with deliberate care. "They killed your crew to protect their secret. They killed my crew, destroyed our ship, and would have killed me too if I hadn't been unconscious in an escape pod. When their patrol ship found the wreckage," Naya stared out at the nebula, remembering the moment she had awakened to find herself alone in the vast emptiness of space. "The official report blamed equipment failure. Faulty reactor containment, they said. Just another tragic accident in the dangerous business of interstellar commerce. But you knew better." Marcus's voice was quiet, understanding. "You knew it was murder." "I knew, but I couldn't prove it. Not until now." She turned back to him, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. "When you mentioned the Zara Voss case, I realized we might be dealing with the same people, the same pattern of cover-ups and convenient deaths." Marcus pulled out his data tablet and activated a holographic display that filled the space between them with interconnected nodes and flowing connections. "I've been mapping the corporate structure for 10 years, tracking personnel moves, budget, allocations, anything that might lead back to my mother's case. Look at this." The display zoomed in on a cluster of names and dates, highlighting connections that formed a web of conspiracy. At the center was a name that made Naya's breath catch. Dren Vex, Senior Vice President of Environmental Affairs. "He's the one," Marcus said, his voice carrying a decade of focused hatred. "He ordered the frame up, supervised the evidence fabrication, and profited from the cover-up. But more than that, he's been doing it for years. Colony after colony. Anyone who gets too close to the truth just disappears. Including my crew," Naya whispered, staring at the holographic web. "Vex authorized the patrol that destroyed our ship. I can see his authorization code in the shipping manifests." For a moment, they sat in silence, each lost in memories of loss and injustice. Then Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The contact was electric, sending warmth up her arm and into her chest. "We can stop him," Marcus said. "Together, we have enough evidence to expose the whole network. But it won't be enough to just release the data. Meridian's propaganda machine will bury it. Just like they buried my mother's story. We need to hit Then where it hurts, their profit margins. Naya turned her hand palm up, intertwining her fingers with his. What did you have in mind? Vex is overseeing the opening of 3 new atmospheric processing facilities this month. If we can prove they're contaminated before they go online, if we can get the evidence to the right people at exactly the right moment. Marcus's eyes lit up with the fire of someone who had found purpose beyond revenge. We can save thousands of lives and destroy Vex's career in the process, and probably get ourselves killed, Naya pointed out, though she was already running calculations in her head. The Star Dancer could reach the target systems, and her contacts in the resistance movement would know how to distribute the evidence. Meridian doesn't take kindly to interference. I know. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I wouldn't ask you to risk your ship and your crew for my vendetta. But this is bigger than personal revenge now. This is about preventing future Zara Vosses, future crews like yours. Naya studied his face, seeing the boy who had watched his mother die and the man he had become in pursuit of justice. Somewhere in between was someone who made her heart race and her carefully built walls crumble. She had sworn never to let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But Marcus Webb was making that promise impossible to keep. There's something you should know, she said, making a decision that would change both their lives. I didn't offer to help you just because of our shared enemy. I did it because I haven't felt this way about anyone since, well, since ever. Marcus's eyes widened, and she could see him processing this new information alongside everything else. Naya, I don't know how to do this. I've spent so long focused on revenge that I don't know how to be anything else. Then let me teach you, she said, leaning closer until she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Let me show you what it's like to fight for something instead of against it. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate intensity of someone who had been holding back years of emotion. She responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck as 10 years of careful planning collided with 3 years of careful isolation. The coffee grew cold. The holographic display continued to rotate unnoticed. And to broken people began the delicate process of becoming whole. We're going to destroy them. Marcus whispered against her lips, his forehead pressed against hers. Not just Vex, but the whole corrupt system. And we're going to build something better in its place. Together, Naya agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss outside the viewport. The nebula swirled in patterns of light and shadow, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. It seemed like an appropriate metaphor for the journey they were beginning, uncertain. Dren Vex stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office on Meridian Station, watching cargo ships ferry materials to the 3 new atmospheric processing facilities that would secure his position as the most profitable department head in corporate history. At 52, he had climbed every rung of the corporate ladder through careful planning, strategic elimination of rivals, and an absolute commitment to the bottom line. The Zara Voss situation had been unfortunate, but necessary. The woman had stumbled onto information that could have cost Meridian billions in retrofit costs and legal settlements. Her death had been clean, efficient, and completely justifiable from a fiduciary standpoint. He had even felt a moment of sympathy for her son, watching the boy's face during the execution broadcast. That sympathy had evaporated when his security algorithms flagged the name Marcus Webb 3 days ago. Sir? His assistant's voice came through the office comm system, interrupting his contemplation. Security Chief Kellum is here for your morning briefing. Send him in. Vex turned from the window as Kellum entered, the massive man's cybernetic implants gleaming under the office's atmospheric lighting. The security chief moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to control violence rather than simply unleash it. We have a problem, Kellum said without preamble, activating a holographic display that filled the center of the office. The web identity is a fabrication. Facial recognition software confirms this is Marcus Voss, Zara's son. He's been preparing for this for 10 years. Vex studied the rotating image of the young man who had somehow slipped through every corporate screening protocol. Marcus had grown into someone who looked disturbingly like his mother. The same intelligent eyes, the same stubborn set to his jaw. What's his current status? Aboard a smuggler vessel called the Star Dancer. The captain is Nia Blackwood, sole survivor of the cargo ship we eliminated 3 years ago near the Kepler colonies. Kellum highlighted additional files in the display. They've been gathering intelligence on our atmospheric processing operations. Our surveillance drone detected sophisticated data mining equipment aboard their ship. The implications hit Vex like a physical blow. If Marcus had connected the Kepler incident to his mother's case, if he had found a way to link the pattern of cover-ups across multiple operations, the damage could be catastrophic, not just to Vex's career, but to the entire corporate structure that depended on maintaining certain convenient fictions. How much do they know? Vex asked, settling into his chair and calling up personnel files on his private terminal. There were protocols for this kind of situation, procedures developed over decades of corporate warfare, enough to be dangerous. Our analysis suggests they're planning to expose the contamination before the new facilities go online. If they succeed, the regulatory investigations alone could cost us. Kellum paused, running calculations. Conservative estimate, 12 billion credits in lost revenue and cleanup costs. Vex was quiet for several minutes, weighing options with the cold calculation that had made him one of Meridian's most valued executives. The easiest solution would be to eliminate both Marcus and Nia, make it look like an accident during a routine smuggling run. But the start answer was fast, its captain experienced, and failure would only draw more attention to operations. That required obscurity to remain profitable. There's another factor. Kellum continued, highlighting a new section of data. Marcus Voss has been in contact with underground resistance cells on 3 different worlds. If we move against him directly, we risk creating a martyr. The resistance loves martyrs. Then we don't make him a martyr, Vex said, his mind already formulating a more elegant solution. We make him a criminal. Alert our media contacts to prepare a story about stolen corporate secrets and terrorist activities. Have our legal department draft charges of industrial espionage and conspiracy to commit economic terrorism. Kellum nodded, understanding the strategy. Frame them the same way we framed his mother. Exactly. But this time, we have the advantage of knowing they're coming. Vex stood and moved to his private safe, withdrawing a data pad that contained his most sensitive files. I want you to personally oversee their capture. Use whatever force is necessary. But I want them alive. Marcus Voss is going to confess to his crimes in a very public trial, and then he's going to be executed just like his terrorist mother. As Kellum left to coordinate the operation, Vex returned to his window view. The 3 new atmospheric processing facilities represented the culmination of a 20-year plan to corner the market on terraforming technology. The fact that the technology was slowly poisoning the worlds it was supposed to improve was an acceptable cost of doing business. Shareholders demanded growth, and growth required a certain flexibility regarding environmental regulations. His personal communicator chimed, displaying a priority message from his counterpart in the mining division. Another environmental activist had been discovered in the Vega colonies, asking uncomfortable questions about mineral extraction techniques. The recommended solution was permanent retirement, handled through the usual channels. Vex approved the action with a simple gesture, then returned his attention to the Marcus Voss problem. The boy had inherited his mother's idealism and combined it with a decade of focused preparation. Under other circumstances, Vex might have admired such dedication. In the current situation, it simply made Marcus more dangerous. The irony wasn't lost on him that the son was following almost exactly the same path as the mother. Zara Voss had also gathered evidence, had also tried to expose corporate malfeasance through dramatic revelation. She had failed because she underestimated the resources Meridian was willing to deploy to protect its interests. Marcus was about to learn the same lesson. 3 hours later, Vex received the call he had been expecting. The start answer had been intercepted by a Meridian patrol squadron. While attempting to infiltrate the Proxima facility, the smuggler ship's pilot had tried to run, leading to a brief but decisive engagement that left the vessel disabled and its crew in custody. Bring them to Interrogation Suite 7, Vex ordered. I want to question them personally before the public trial. The interrogation suite was a sterile white room designed to break down psychological resistance. Through careful manipulation of light, sound, and atmospheric pressure, when Vex entered, he found Marcus and Naya chained to chairs facing each other across a small table. Both showed signs of the capture. Marcus had a cut above his left eye, while Naya's flight suit was torn at the shoulder. What struck Vex immediately was the way they looked at each other. Even in captivity, even facing certain death, there was something between them that seemed to transcend their immediate circumstances. Love. He realized with distaste. They had actually fallen in love during their little revenge mission. Marcus Voss, Vex said, settling into a chair positioned so that both prisoners could see him clearly. Or do you prefer Marcus Webb? I have to admit, the false identity was impressively constructed. 10 years of careful planning, corporate, education records, employment history. You almost fooled us. Marcus raised his eyes to meet Vex's gaze, and the executive was surprised by the lack of fear he saw there. Dren Vex, you're smaller than I expected, and you're exactly what I expected, your mother's son. Right down to the misguided idealism and poor judgment. Vex activated a holographic display showing the evidence Marcus had gathered. Though I have to give you credit for thoroughness, this analysis of our atmospheric processing operations is quite comprehensive. Comprehensive enough to destroy you, Naya said, speaking for the first time since he had entered the room. Every news outlet in the galaxy will have copies within the hour. Vex smiled, genuinely amused by her defiance. Actually, they won't, you see. We've been monitoring your communications for quite some time. Every file you transmitted, every contact you made, all of it has been intercepted and contained. Your resistance friends are probably wondering why they haven't heard from you. He could see the realization dawning in their eyes, the understanding that their carefully orchestrated plan had been compromised from the beginning. It was a look he had seen before, in the faces of other idealists who had underestimated the reach of corporate power. But I'm not here to gloat, Vex continued. I'm here to offer you a choice. Confess to corporate espionage and terrorist activities. Publicly repudiate your accusations against Meridian, and I'll ensure your deaths are quick and clean. Refuse, and you'll spend the next several months in a medical research facility, helping our scientists test new interrogation techniques. Marcus and Naya exchanged a look that conveyed entire conversations without words. Then Marcus turned back to Vex with something that looked remarkably like pity. You know what's funny, Marcus said. You think this is about revenge, about getting justice for my mother. But it's not anymore. It's about stopping you from killing anyone else's mother. How touching, Vex replied dryly, but ultimately irrelevant. Your noble intentions won't save the people living on contaminated worlds, and they certainly won't save you. Maybe not, Naya said quietly, but love will. Before Vex could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the Intero.